Hello and welcome to Jason's Weird Reads. I'm Jason White, and today I'm going to be talking about my most recent reads and From the Hip style. If you don't know what From the Hip is, that's basically where I just talk about some stuff related either to my channel or to the horror community, and then I talk about the books that I've been reading and what I am reading right now. Um, so, I want to start off. I don't want to start off on this, but I'm going to start off on this on a sad note. I was gutted on Friday, I think it was May the 31st, to learn that Scott Wampler from the King cast passed away quite suddenly. Um, I've been listening to the King cast only for about 7 months, ever since I started my new job, and it's I managed to binge a lot of those episodes, and I really, when you listen to a podcast, it feels almost like the hosts become like invisible friends, and Scott Wampler and Eric Vespi are certainly that for me in a sense. So it was gutting to learn of it. But, of course, when you're a podcast fan, you know that they're not really your friend. I didn't know Scott Wampler. I didn't know him at all. All I knew was how he presented himself on the show. And that's going to be a serious gap in my life. And so I don't know what's going to happen with the King cast now. It's an incredibly awesome show to listen to. I absolutely love it. And his absence is going to leave a void. But Eric Vespi said that the King cast will continue. So it'll be interesting to see how he continues it. But my condolences to Eric Vespi, to Scott Wampler's friends and loved ones, and rest in peace, man. All right, so moving on to some happier news. I have an announcement, a release. I said that I was going to be releasing fiction this year, and so far I'm on the mark. Switching jobs has really helped. So the first thing is a chapbook. Now I've talked about this chapbook a lot, and I wanted to do it in a way that was personal. I wanted to print it out, sort of like the way Matt Wall does in chapbook form. So it was personal that way. It's handmade at home, but I went and bought a printer for that task, and that printer, although it does work, it really doesn't work. The ink just doesn't do the cover any justice. It kind of smeared the ink, and I just don't know how to fix it. So I decided to go with KDP, and here is, I guess you could say, the galley, the not for sale. And I did the cover myself. It's supposed to be a chapbook, and so the cover isn't supposed to be anything special. But this is it. Hungry Ghosts, Poems and Flash Fiction by Jason White. It'll be available on June the 30th. I'm not too sure if I'm going. It's only 26 pages long, if that. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to release an ebook format yet, but this will be available to buy on the Kindle or on Amazon June 30th. But I want to get a bunch of these, and I'm going to maybe add another tier to the Patreon if anyone wants to join that. And the Patreon, the link is down there if you want to join. You're going to be able to get things like this for being a member. And it's just basically, it's like, I don't know how many poems. There's a good 10 to 12 poems and three pieces of flash fiction in this, and I can't wait to get that out. There's something else coming this year, maybe two things if I can. I want this to be a series of chapbooks, excuse me, and so this is the first one. I'm thinking of calling them the Drunken Bones series of chapbooks. We'll see how that goes. So that's that. And also keep your ears peeled. Go to the podcast which has been taking up a lot of time. And I apologize for not doing videos as much, because it's either the writing or the podcast that's kind of digging into my YouTube video making time. But the first episode for the Dark Tower with Sin should be up Sunday night. So probably by the time this video is up, you will be able to go to the Weird Reads podcast on your favorite podcatcher and listen to episode 1, The Gunslinger, where Sin from Sin's Book Nook and I discuss the Dark Tower. We're going to be talking about one book an episode, probably. I don't know if we're going to be breaking up future, because the books get really long. Like the one we're on now, Wizard and Glass, is like 900 and some pages long. I don't know if we can fit that all into one episode, but we'll see. We haven't recorded episode 4 yet, but we have recorded up to episode 3. So while you're checking out that podcast episode, I've been asking this a lot and nobody's doing it. So if you could please just leave a review on iTunes, the iTunes store, or the Apple Podcasts. That would help the show. That would help the show grow a lot, and I would appreciate it so much. I mean, it's a free and easy way to help Weird Reads and Jason's Weird Reads. So if you could do that, I would be very much appreciative. All right, so in other news, the book club choice, and if you want to join the book club, you can easily do so by going to the Fable app. Fable app centers on book clubs, and Jason's Weird Reads book club is on there. The link is actually in the show notes as well. So the book we're reading for June is Every House is Haunted by Ian Rogers. That was my choice, and everyone voted on it. I was surprised, because I don't think my choice has ever won a vote, except for maybe the first one, the very first vote. I don't mind, but I'm glad that my choice won this vote. So this I haven't started it yet, because I'm currently reading. Here's the paper for it. I'm currently reading this beast, and I'll get to that in a second. Actually, I can get into it now. Once I'm done with You Like It Darker by Stephen King, I can switch to Every House is Haunted. So it's a short story fest for me in June. And so far the stories in these are really good. There's something very hypnotic about King's writing. Stephen King can draw you in like no other author. I don't know what it is about his writing, but it's just incredible. He could write a story that has no plot whatsoever, no ideas in it. It's just about a guy making a grocery list and then executing that grocery list, and maybe some conversations this person has along the way of getting his groceries, and it would be fascinating, honestly. I don't know what it is, but, well, he's been writing for like over 50 years, so I guess that could help. And also by Stephen King. So a month of Stephen King. I'm really catching up on my Stephen King, and that makes me happy. I'm also reading Wizard and Glass by Stephen King. I'm reading this with Sin, as I mentioned earlier, and we're going to be talking about it on the podcast, so stay tuned for that. All right, so what have I read? Well, at the end of last month, I said I was reading More Than Evil by Bill Richardson, and I talked about this book a lot, so I'm going to try to keep it short. But this book is a lot of fun. If you're into 80s to early, maybe mid-90s horror novels, I think this would fit right in almost perfectly. It just has that atmosphere to it, and the characters, it just feels like it comes from that time period, even though it doesn't. There's just something in Bill's writing that fits right in there, and it's a lot of fun. It's got its gory parts, and it's got its action-packed parts. Like, if there's a chase scene that kind of reminds me a little bit of the Terminator movies chase scenes. It's just full of action, and it's like nonstop, and it's just crazy. I absolutely loved it, especially Terminator 2. Although I don't know if he had that movie specifically in mind when he wrote that scene, but it's a lot of fun. Let's just say that. Going back to the Stephen King here, there's been a lot of Stephen King read lately, as I mentioned. I read The Wastelands by Stephen King, and that episode should be out in, I don't know, a month or so. That would be episode 3, because The Wastelands is book number 3 in the Dark Tower series, and I really enjoyed this book. This book was a lot of fun, and I think I explained last month, because I was reading it at the beginning of when I did my last recent reads video. I mentioned that I don't remember this book at all, and that's true. I don't know how I skipped this book when I first read what I thought was, I guess, the first 3 books. And it's funny, because for the longest time, I kept wondering, I thought I only read 3 books in the series. I was like, I read the first 3 books. But whenever I read the synopsis for book 4, which is Wizard and Glass, which is the book I'm reading right now, I'm like, no, that's the last book I remember reading, but I'm pretty sure I only read 3 books. I really don't know how The Wastelands was missed. It's a very strange mystery. I wish I could go back and talk to myself and say, where is The Wastelands? Why haven't you read that? The only thing I can think of is I'm pretty sure I was borrowing these books from the library. And I'm pretty sure, though I could be wrong, that it was out. And so I just went ahead and read book 4. Dumb mistake, honestly, but I don't know. Alright, moving on. I also read Joyland by Stephen King. This is one of those books that I've been meaning to read since its release, honestly. But I remember Cliff, I think, from Cliff's Dark Gems. He recommended this book after I was talking about one of Stephen King's other books. Might have been Later or something like that. I really enjoyed that book, and if it was Cliff, he said that I would probably enjoy Joyland more, because it's sort of a similar story, but it's better. And I did. I really enjoyed this book. It didn't have like a weird ending that Later had, because Later had that strange ending stapled to the end of it. But the Joyland was it was solid all the way through. And it also I was listening to the audiobook of this at work, and the ending teared me up a little bit. If you've read it, you know probably the part I'm talking about that had me tearing up. It was just such a sad story, and I wasn't really I mean, when Stephen King can do that to me. Sometimes it's a miss when he tries to make you cry or whatever, but Joyland was a hit, and I didn't like openly weep. My eyes just got all blurry and and filled with tears. I love it when any author can make me feel, but Stephen King seems to be truly adept at that. And speaking of making me feel, I also read Cujo by Stephen King. Now, this book didn't make me cry at the end. It should have, honestly. It should have made me cry harder than Joyland did, but Cujo did not make me cry. And I think the reason for that is because, the ending was spoiled for me a long time ago. I know how it ends. Which is unfortunate because, well, the book's been out for 40 years, so I guess it doesn't matter now at this point. But I should have read it long ago, right? But anyways, I guess I'll skip past the ending. We'll talk about the story itself, because this story is intense, and it's all because of the child. So if you don't know what Cujo's about, if you're like me and haven't read it, maybe don't even know what the synopsis is, it's about a mother and her son who gets trapped in a car because of a dog that has rabies, a large Saint Bernard dog. So this dog weighs like 200 pounds, and it has rabies, and it's stalking the car. It won't leave. They're stuck in this car for like a couple of days. The interesting thing about this book is, I think, what might drive some people away from it. I think a lot of people are more interested maybe in if this started with them being trapped in the car. But there's a lot of story leading up to that incident, and that's what I found interesting with it, is the I think, and I saw somebody, because a lot of people are reading Cujo right now because there's a sequel to that in You Like It Darker, and that's exactly why I hopped on this. I want to read Rattlesnakes, which is in this collection here, and Rattlesnakes is a sequel to Cujo. So I was like, if I'm going to read Rattlesnakes, then I'm going to need to know this, the source material. I can't just jump into a story that goes into the same characters and whatnot years later without knowing what happened in the main story. So I read Cujo for that reason. And to go back to my point, I saw somebody who did the same thing on TikTok, and they said they didn't like Cujo, which is fine, absolutely fine. But the reason why they didn't like Cujo is because they couldn't get into the characters. And that is precisely the point. I think this is the reason why some people don't get into books like Pet Sematary, because King builds a lot. Character build-up. That's the type of writer he is. He's a character builder. And if you can't dig the characters that you're reading about, if they're not interesting, or at least even interesting to you, then you're not going to be interested in the story that's eventually going to come. And Cujo is kind of filled with characters that I would say most of them are unlikable to one degree or another. I kind of liked the main characters, the husband and the wife of the son, of the wife and son who get stuck in the car. They had their problems for sure, but almost all marriages do have problems. Maybe not to this extent, or at least what happens in the story. Maybe that not all marriages go through that, but all marriages do have issues. We all become a jerk at some point in our marriages. And there's always if you have kids, those kids are sort of dragged along with it. The interesting part, and I'm going to spoil just a little bit of this book here, my thought was what made these characters interesting was that they were able to work through their problems no matter how big they were, and they were going to fix it. If the tragedy in the car didn't happen, they would have fixed it. And that, to me, I think was brilliant, and that made the tragedy at the end of the book even harder to read. So I absolutely loved Cujo. The more I talk about it here, the more excited I kind of get about it. But there's a couple of warnings. If you don't like the characters in this book, you're not going to like the story. And that's, like I said, that's fine. You don't have to like everything that King writes. All right, I'm going to move on, because I could talk about this forever. I also read the last book club choice for Jason's Weird Reads book club was The Forgotten Island. And that's by David Sodergren. And I really enjoyed this book. Some of the members in the book club didn't enjoy it. And again, that's fine. They didn't like all the sexual assault that happens in this book. And it just felt to one of them like a typical slasher where all the women take their clothes off and then get brutally murdered. And there's some truth to that. But I think, honestly, I enjoyed the story. I think the author was trying to make some remarks, some opinions against male masculinity and toxic male masculinity and the way we treat women and the way men typically look at women. But I don't know, it could be easily taken as the other way, because there is a lot of nudity. I found that the story was interesting, and I also, to get away from the argument of actually, well, I think it's interesting. A lot of people compared this book to like a Richard Lehman book, and I can see the comparisons. But I would like to take it a step further and say that this is sort of like an anti-Richard Lehman book. Maybe I'm wrong, and I could be wrong. Please tell me if you think I'm wrong. So I'm going to move on from that, because I actually never thought of it that way until I started talking about it here. But I also want to talk about the creatures in this book because I thought that was completely original. I've never seen anything quite like what happens in this book in regards to who's killing or what's killing the people on this strange little island that everyone finds themselves stuck on. So this isn't my favorite David Sodergren book, but I still really enjoyed it. I believe this was his first published book, and that's interesting because it feels like a David Sodergren book. Like I wouldn't say that he hasn't evolved, because if you've read The Har, that was a big change from what he typically writes, but it still had that David Sodergren feel to it, at least from what I remember. All right, moving on. I also read The Return by Rachel Harrison. This was my first book that I've ever read by Rachel Harrison, and it's not going to be the last. I was impressed. I really enjoyed this book. The Return is about a woman who one day she's having an argument with her husband, and she's got a lot of complicated emotions. Let's just say that, about her marriage, about her life, and the way her life is going. And so she decides to go on, an impromptu hike. And during that hike, she goes missing. Now, it's not a story about her and her husband so much as it is a story about her and her other 3 girlfriends. And the story takes place from the point of view of a woman who is one of her friends. And so this woman is missing for like 2 years. She's gone for 2 years. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, she returns, as the title suggests. And so the girls, they decide to plan a weekend getaway as sort of like a reunion with their old friend, because this is what they did. They would always have like weekends away where they would go somewhere new and they would drink and just do things that friends do. And so they go and do that, but they find when they get there that their friend who's been missing for 2 years, there's something really off about her. It's her, but it's not her. I'm going to leave it at that, because this book could have done well without answering the question of where did she go, but it doesn't, and I'm kind of glad it didn't. I think if it didn't go to where it went, I would have preferred an ambiguous ending, but this book goes into some interesting territory, and it's horrifying. I love this book. I can't wait to see what else. Like, Rachel Harrison has written like 3 or 4 books now, I think. So I want to go and gobble up all the other ones and see if I like them just as much. I also read Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chismar. Now, this book, I remember about 2, maybe 3 years ago, Rachel from Shades of Orange messaged me, and she said, "You have to read this book. I think you're going to love it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I added it to my TBR. I think I went and got the audio book for it right after she suggested it, and then I didn't read it. I mean, that type of thing happens to me all the time. And it's not that I'm not reading books recommended to me to be rude. It's just I can be a very big mood reader, and also time's always an issue. Actually, that's the biggest issue, is the time, because I'm usually reading something for my channel, and I can't read quite as many books as a lot of other booktubers can. So I always meant to read it, I just never did. But I've been reading more books this year, and I had a spot open, and I was looking for a book to fill that spot, and happened to be Chasing the Boogeyman, and I love this book. It was a lot of fun. It basically takes Richard Chismar's life, so it's like autofiction, which is like a mixture of nonfiction or memoir or autobiography, a mixture of that with fiction. So this is an actual subgenre. Bret Easton, whatever his name is, the writer of American Psycho, did this. Similarly, anyways, a whole autofiction subgenre. So in the book, Richard Chismar takes us through his life, and he throws in a killer, the fictional killer. And that's not necessarily a spoiler. It's mentioned in the foreword. and it's also mentioned again in the afterword. So the rest is pretty much real life. This is Richard Chismar's life, him growing up. It's a coming of age story, and with a serial killer. And it's just one of those page turning books. I think I listened to it in like 2 days. I just couldn't stop listening to it. I absolutely loved it. So this year might be very difficult choosing my top 10 because I've been going through my list. I want to do a best of the year so far for 2024, and it was easy picking the 10 books for this, so I can only imagine what it's going to be like at the end of the year when I have to narrow it down to 10 books. All right, the last book I read in May was The Day of the Door by Laurel Hightower. Now, this book takes place in a very haunted house where this group of kids grew up. One of their kids died at they all believe it was by the hand of their mother, but she was never charged for it. So years later, they go back to this house. It's like a good 10 years later or something like that. With a TV crew, of all things. But, sometimes it takes something. If you think of like Head Full of Ghosts, sometimes it takes something like that in order to create healing. And that's pretty much what this book is taking on the concept of. It's like this extreme situation of people being interested in recording a haunting in your house or something like that, for everyone to get together and actually talk about their issues. And so when they get there, they find out that this book is unusually haunted. There is something quite possibly demonic going on in this place, and it's a great story. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to be talking to Laurel next weekend, which I believe is June the 8th. I think it's either the Saturday or the Sunday. I can't remember. But next weekend, this is June the 2nd that I'm recording this. Hopefully, I'll be able to get this video out before the next weekend, unlike the last video. So I'm going to maybe work the rest of the day on doing that and maybe have it out by Monday. So that is my recent reads from the Hip issue. And I want to thank everyone who watched, especially if you're still here at the end of this video. If you are, leave me some books in the darkness down there, and I'll leave you some books in return. So keep being safe, keep being creative, and keep being weird, my friends. And I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.